Story, Incarnate Prelude. T'Challa's sword could also be used, suggested a fidgety Abner Little, but the sword will only obey you if T'Challa is killed by your hand. And then there is Ororo, and what does Mr. Little think I should use to ensnare them? Inquired Machida. Little wiped a film of sweat from his forehead. He looked at the list he had written on the paper in front of him and felt a knot tighten in his stomach because he was about to betray someone who saved his life. Then he opened his mouth. Well, 2 weeks later. Chapter 1. The Burj Khalifa in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The elevator stopped at floor 185 of the tower where the socialite lived. His apartment was the epitome of opulence: Persian carpets, gold-rimmed lighting fixtures, ornate pillars, famous paintings, and royal furniture. One of the ivory white-rimmed windows had the curtains drawn, and here the socialite viewed the heavens through a telescope. He took pictures of the universe and they came out of a printer that was linked to the telescope. The bing made by the elevator caught his attention. He looked across the living room to the elevator. His 7 bodyguards went to the elevator door as a precaution. The socialite had sent 2 bodyguards on an errand and they were now returning. The socialite looked away from the door, and for a moment he paused in front of the majestic view of Dubai and the Persian Gulf. He even saw the lights of Chejula. Then, like a man tired of watching his hoard of gold coins, he simply turned away and resumed searching the stars. Meanwhile, the elevator door opened. The bodyguards looked up. Their 2 comrades dressed in black suits stood straight like pins. Suddenly the 2 bodyguards fell forward lifeless with their eyes wide opened. Their killers stood silently in the elevator. They were 3 men in business attire. For the bodyguards everything came down to seconds and the following of the drills to the letter. 4 of the bodyguards reached for their handguns while 3 headed for the socialite. The 3 men in the elevator seemingly disappeared, such was their pace. They raced into the apartment. 2 of the killers hammered the armed bodyguards with their bare hands. The room was filled with the sounds of arms being broken, necks snapped, and ribs smashed. The 3rd killer leapt astoundingly from the front of the elevator and over to the window. He landed near the socialite just as the bodyguards were coming to protect him. With the grace and style of a Shaolin master, the killer locked the socialite in a hold with one hand, while he attacked the bodyguards with his other limbs. He knocked a bodyguard out of the reinforced window with one hand thrust. The man went screaming along the great tower to his demise. The next 2 were dispatched with leg thrusts to their hearts. The trauma caused the organs to explode. Then the man released the socialite and floored him. He rested a boot on the man's fast-breathing chest. Time was of the essence before the socialite went into complete shock. "Where is the Audic piece?" the man asked calmly. "The Audic," answered the shivering socialite. "It's in the safe." "Let's get it," said the man authoritatively in a coarse voice. Time flowed quickly for the socialite. Adrenaline and shock made the matter worse. He led the 3 men into a room and directed them to a disguised safe in the right lower corner wall. The main intruder concentrated, then he punched through the safe door, ripping it off the hinges on his follow-through. His arm bled profusely. Meanwhile, a comrade reached into the safe and took out a small ornate statue. "This is it," he said. The 3rd man knocked the socialite to the ground. "Now you pay the price for stealing from our country," he said, and snuffed out the socialite's life with a fist strike to the heart. An hour later, the 3 men walked out of the Burj Khalifa tower complex and entered a waiting car. Then they headed for the airport. The mission leader contacted his superior via a cell phone. "Mark Namara, we got it," he said while looking at his bloodied hand that was wrapped in a towel. "Good. Take it at once to Machida." "I'm on my way to Wakanda right now to find the last piece," said Mark Namara. Chapter 2. London, Abner Little's empty flat house. Mark Namara terminated the cellular call, and he looked at the landline that was on the floor of the cleared-out flat. An idea came to him, so he pressed redial on the landline. The last number was for a cab company. Its operator answered the call. "Hello," said Mark Namara in a gentle voice. "I accidentally left an important document in one of your cabs. It came to my address, 34 Westchester Street, London. Can I get in touch with the driver?" He hoped that little had left within the last 24 hours. The accommodating operator placed him in contact with the driver. "Hello. I'm the stumpy guy that you picked up on Westchester Street. I've seemed to misplace a document between you and the place you dropped me off, which was I remember you. You were worried for the whole trip. I took you to the Wakandan embassy," said the cab driver. "Thanks. I'll call back to see if you found anything," said Mark Namara. He hung up, and then he spoke to the three comrades who were also in the flat. "The collector went to the Wakandan embassy," he said. "We're going there now." The four hurried out of the flat. They wore trench coats, which hid their weapons. Mark Namara carried a mystical bow and a battle mace. Like his comrades, the chief warrior priest had an enchanted stone pendant around his neck. The pendant formed an invisible shield around him in battle. They entered their car and bolted through the streets of London, to the Wakandan embassy. "He's probably seeking T'Challa's protection through there," pondered Mark Namara. He had been tracking Little for 2 weeks to reclaim the artifact that the man possessed. Seemingly Little knew someone was on his trail, therefore, he fled. "I shouldn't disturb Machida with the news before his prayer service," thought Mark Namara, since within the hour the leader would start leading their nation in a day of prayer. Administration Building, Central City, Wakanda. Ororo twirled the throwing knife in her hand, while she read the Berbatov incident report. There were several inconsistencies that caught her eye and they required an explanation. She looked up at T'Challa, who had walked to the center of the office. He was speaking to Enzi to arrange a meeting with her. "We'll try to pass by your house sometime this week," he said to the 16-year-old girl. Apparently she agreed because T'Challa said, "All right." Then he hung up the Kimoyo, handheld supercomputer. "We will also have to speak to Shuri about the Berbatov mission," stated Ororo. "Really? What's wrong with it?" asked the burly T'Challa. "Some of the events don't add up," replied Ororo. T'Challa approached her desk and she was just about to hand him the report when the secretary called. "The London embassy has someone requesting asylum," said the secretary. "He says you know him. Something about the King Solomon mines." "Abner Little," muttered T'Challa. "Put the embassy through," he said. The secretary complied. "Who is he?" asked Ororo. "A treasure hunter. I encountered him some years ago." "And he is a treacherous bastard," replied T'Challa. "He must have got into a serious jam to request asylum," commented Ororo. Another call came and it was from the Foreign Affairs Division. T'Challa and Ororo were informed that President Machida of Earth requested an urgent conversation with them. "All right," said Ororo. Afterwards she contacted the secretary and told her to hold the call from the embassy. T'Challa believed that Machida may have been calling for assistance since Wakanda had offered its help to all the countries of the world. President Machida's face appeared on the video phone. He had slicked black hair, green eyes, and a pious aura. And he was 23 years old, although he looked older. He greeted the Wakandan leaders warmly. "I'm calling in a matter of national importance to my country," said Machida. "We're listening," said Ororo. "I believe you have heard of a treasure hunter called Abner Little. Well, he has an item that belongs to my country. I am humbly asking if you can persuade him to hand over the artifact to my nation." My people deserve the right to see their heritage in our museum, said Machida. What does this artifact look like? Inquired Ororo. Like this, answered Machida, and the screen was split into two. Machida was on the right and a stone carving was on the left. There were words from an unknown language written on the stone. How do you know little has it? Asked T'Challa. Machida cleared his throat. The artifact was taken by our former colonial masters. We tracked down the particular person who took the item and found out that he had given it to Abner Little. I see, said T'Challa in a non-committal manner. I took the liberty to send my best tracker to your country to assist, said Machida. Tracker? Asked Ororo. Just a term for a person who buys back our stolen heritage. He usually is at international auction houses. He is a very harmless person. We are willing to compensate Mr. Little handsomely for the return of the artifact, said Machida. We'll give it some thought, said T'Challa. What Machida caught himself. And you can tell your tracker not to come at this time, said Ororo. We'll contact you in due course. Machida composed himself. I apologize for throwing this on you. I will eagerly await your answer. Thank you for listening, he said. Thanks for calling, said T'Challa. Then the video phone returned to a blank blue screen. T'Challa grinned. Guess that explains Abner's actions, remarked T'Challa. And we're right in the middle of it, said Ororo. The couple took the call from the embassy, and a 5-foot Englishman appeared on the screen. The great Ororo. It is such a pleasure to speak with you. And T'Challa, how has it been going? Get to the point, Little, ordered T'Challa. I'm being hunted by a group of murderers working for the Ith government. I have no other place to hide. Can I stay in Wakanda until the heat cools off? T'Challa rubbed his forehead. We already know why the Ith government is after you. But what is the significance of the artifact? The Black Panther asked. It is part of a set. Some collectors took it out of the country and distributed it amongst themselves. A few of the pieces ended up in a couple of museums. These were recently stolen and the guards killed, replied Little, a bit flabbergasted that T'Challa knew about the artifact beforehand. Then why didn't you go to the police if you know who is responsible? Inquired Ororo. Little stuttered a bit. Well, I have a few pending issues with the law right now, he said. All right. You will get temporary asylum in Wakanda, and you will hand over the artifact to us, said T'Challa. But, protested Little. T'Challa gave him a disapproving look. At which point Little agreed. We'll come and pick you up, said T'Challa. Chapter 3 Mark Namara strolled into the embassy's lobby, his mystical weapons going undetected by the sensors. He inquired about his brother Abner Little from a guard. He even described that his brother had a penchant for pinstrip suits and hat. The unknowing guard indicated that he did see Abner Little entering, but was unaware of his present location. I'll check the desk then, said Mark Namara and walked away. He telephoned his associates waiting outside in the car. He's here and so might the Black Panther and Storm. Get the cameras ready. I will force them outside, he said. As he approached the teller, he visualized the layout of the embassy. There were 4 floors. Hopefully Little would be in a room on one of those floors. He scanned the vicinity. Heavily armed guards were ubiquitous. Not a problem, he thought. Therefore, he casually removed the heavy battle mace from under his coat. Then he exploded into a sprint towards the stairs that he spotted. His sudden disappearance caused the guards to sound the emergency alarm. T'Challa and Ororo arrived in the south section of the 3rd floor. They heard the alarm. What's going on? Inquired Ororo, while she checked her kimono. It accessed the embassy's security system. She read the notification. "It's an intruder alert," said Ororo to T'Challa. "Where's Little?" asked T'Challa. Ororo checked. "He's still in the holding room. We'll go there." Chances that's where the intruder is headed. That's when the door was broken down by Mark Namor's mace. He was on the course of moving from room to room until Little was found. Immediately Ororo's eyes turned white. "You have one chance to surrender quietly," she said sternly. Mark Namara contemplated whether or not Little had passed on the artifact to the couple. Finally he guessed that they had it. "I want the tablet," he demanded. "You must be from Earth," said T'Challa while he demagnetized the sword from his back. Its nanorobotic sheathing flowed into the hilt, which had twinned golden time-space computers that were disguised as Royal Panther seals. "Don't you know that invasion of a country's embassy is considered an act of war? Just give me the tablet," reinforced Mark Namara. A confrontation with the couple was always on the cards. It was the reason Machida was sending him to Wakanda. "I have to get them outside," he thought. The Black Panther and Storm gave him a stone-cold expression. He understood, thus he lunged into a full attack. His speed rendered him invisible to Ororo, yet she sensed his movements. T'Challa's hypervision gave him a better sight of the attacker. Mark Namara raced up the right wall and onto the ceiling. In those moments he returned the mace under his coat, and he withdrew a bow with no line. But the second his hand was between the tips of the arc, a fiery line appeared along with a flaming arrow. He aimed at Ororo's forehead and fired it. Instinct made Ororo duck out of the way. The arrow shot by her long white hair and lashed into the back wall. The arrow exploded, tearing a great hole into the embassy. The blast was like a bomb going off. The shock wave knocked T'Challa and Ororo forward. Mark Namara landed softly on the broken concrete-laden floor. He observed that the arrow had punctured a hole that led outside. "Good," he thought. T'Challa came at him with a diagonal sword slash. It was too quick for him to reach the mace in time, therefore, he blocked with the bow. The bow snapped like a dry twig. Then T'Challa's free fist rushed in with a mad bull's ferocity and it smashed into Mark Namor's right face. Except, he did feel anything because of the invisible shield around him. He swiftly retrieved the mace and swung it freely into the Black Panther. He believed that he had got the better of T'Challa. However, the Black Panther angled the sword to intercept the mace. Mark Namor's strength was equal to the Black Panther's, thus their weapons shook and rattled from the opposing forces. T'Challa used it to his advantage. He lessened the tension, allowing Mark Namara to follow through on his swing. However, T'Challa sidestepped him and then pushed his body upwards in a scissors kick. The force of impact lifted Mark Namara off his feet and into a nearby wall. T'Challa completed a full revolution and landed on his feet. Meanwhile, Ororo saw an opportunity to end the battle quickly. But the Wind Rider heard the rush of missiles behind her. She glanced back to see that the pieces of the arrow had locked onto her like heat-seeking missiles. She manipulated the air around her and formed a strong wind current that lifted her out of the danger. Still, the arrow splinters changed direction and went after her. "That's enough," said Ororo, as she extended a hand. Suddenly plasma energy flowed from her fingertips and into the splinters, which subsequently disintegrated. She turned to Mark Namara with the intention of finishing the fight. He disentangled himself from T'Challa and bolted through the hole. The Black Panther chased after him at the same blinding pace, eventually grappling the prey by the legs as Mark Namara dived out into the back of the embassy. Both warriors fell heavily on the asphalt surface. Yet, they both sprang onto their feet at the same time. Mark Namara realized that he needed to keep moving in order to avoid Ororo's offensives, and he required his best martial arts skills to defeat T'Challa. Storm exited the embassy over the combatants. She didn't waste time as she flew to Mark Namara. "T'Challa, move!" she shouted. At once the Black Panther made a double back somersault away from Mark Namara. Instantly a whirlwind mushroomed around the attacker, but Storm was not finished. She then dropped the temperature below zero within the wind vortex. Slowly the dark whirlwind subsided and it revealed a frozen Mark Namara. Storm floated over her ice sculpture. "We'll check on Little now," she said. Chapter 4 Abner Little's dwarfism was caused by a growth defect in his infancy. But his lack of good character was the outcome of his selfishness. When the Black Panther and Storm entered the holding room, they found him sitting within himself. The tablet was on the table before him along with his reading glasses. The tablet was fragile looking. A mere touch seemed sufficient for the artifact to crumble into dust. T'Challa thought the same. He pulled back the Black Panther's habit mask and his brown eyes focused on Little. Little looked up at the sleek muscled man and the beautiful Ororo. He noticed the dust on their uniforms. "What happened out there?" he asked. "I heard the commotion. Someone came in search of this," answered T'Challa, as he sat on the side of the table and pointed to the tablet. "But we took care of it," explained Ororo. "Was it an Athean?" inquired Little. "Probably," said T'Challa. "Care to explain what exactly this is?" Little heard the seriousness stressed in T'Challa's voice. "It's a key. It joins with the set and opens a portal," answered Little. "One of those," commented Ororo, since she had experience with similar type dimensional gateways. "Do you know where the gateway leads to?" "No," said Little plainly. "All right. We'll take it off your hands," said T'Challa. Surprisingly to T'Challa, the little man didn't protest. He simply nodded in agreement. "Are you all right?" asked T'Challa concerned, since he knew Little usually tried everything in his power to keep such objects. "Everything is fine," was the flimsy answer. Little was obviously scared of something. T'Challa was not sure what it was though. "What's going on in that calculating brain of yours?" pondered the Black Panther with his eye on Little. T'Challa picked up the tablet and he stood. "We're going to it right now. We'll settle everything when we get back." "Great," said Little with minimal enthusiasm for the venture. T'Challa and Ororo left and went to the standby mini-jet in the embassy basement. On the way they spoke with the ambassador about the embassy and a statement to the British Prime Minister and authorities. The still frozen Mark Namara was placed in the jet. Thereafter Ororo contacted the Foreign Affairs Division and told them to send a message to Machida that she and T'Challa were coming to Earth. Meanwhile T'Challa gave the tablet to the ambassador for him to place in the vault. On the trip out of the country T'Challa shared his thoughts on Little. "I have never seen him so rattled before," he said. "What is going to happen the next time he gets in trouble like this?" asked Ororo. "Is he worth the effort?" "Not a bit, but for some reason I can't deny him help. Sounds like my relationship with Callisto. You know that they are bad, yet you can't help looking out for them. So what do you call such people? They don't fit exactly into the categories of friends, enemies, or friend-enemies." "Pains," said Ororo with a half-smile. "And what about this Machida? I doubt his errand boy would enter the embassy without his permission. If he did then it was very stupid since such a thing is a written invitation to a showdown," said T'Challa. "Probably Machida doesn't care," suggested Ororo. "Then he must be supremely confident in his ability to withstand a backlash from us. Which should be a cause for concern on our part," said Ororo wittingly. "His tracker was impressive, so I'm assuming that he will be twice as formidable." T'Challa remembered Little's demeanor in the holding room. It was like the quivering man's eyes were involuntarily sending a message. "Something is not right," T'Challa said to Ororo. "And I was thinking that the tracker might have accomplices like a getaway driver or a waiting plane at the airport. Obviously they would have told Machida that the tracker didn't make it. Do you want to go back?" "Yes." "All right. We'll drop off the tracker in Wakanda and head back to the embassy." It was on the hour mark that the couple returned to the holding room. Little dropped his jaw and his eyes seemed as though they had come across the most frightful thing in the universe. T'Challa raced to the man, seizing him by the collar and then slamming him into the wall. Then the Black Panther punched the wall at the side of Little's head, the fist going straight through. "Talk," shouted T'Challa. "I'm sorry I betrayed you. But I had no choice. Machida was going to kill me. Little, if you don't tell me everything right now, I will kill you," warned T'Challa. "Okay," squealed Little. "He wanted your sword to open the gateway and Ororo as a life force sacrifice to his master." "You said the tablet would open the gateway," said Ororo, who was now standing near him. "Yes and no. You see, the tablet would not survive the process because of its age," revealed Little. "How did you meet Machida?" quizzed T'Challa. "He hunted me down," replied a tepid Little. T'Challa had a question that would steer his future association with Little. "Did you guide him to the other collectors?" Little swallowed deeply. "Yes," he said ashamedly. "You despicable runt," said T'Challa contemptuously, as he released the man and allowed him to fall. "So it was a lie that Machida was after you," stated Ororo. "No. That was true. I took the tablet, because I thought he didn't have need for it." "Is that everything?" asked Ororo forcibly. "I gave him a list of other devices that could open the gateway," responded Little. "What is on the other side of the gateway?" inquired Ororo. "I don't know," said Little bluntly while he stared fearfully at her. "One more question. Why were you so scared if you were sending us into a trap?" asked T'Challa. "Because I knew what would happen if you survived." "That I will be a dead man," said Little plainly. "But it was either I helped him or he would have killed me." "Little, I want the list of devices that you gave Machida, and then I want you out the embassy in the next 10 minutes. And don't ever call on me for assistance ever again," said T'Challa harshly. And the Black Panther was true to his word, for Little was kicked out soon after he divulged the devices. "We'll get the commandos to get these items," stated Ororo, as she went over the list. "In the meantime, let's keep our appointment with Machida. But before we do, I want to ask the tracker a few questions," said T'Challa. "And your sword?" said Ororo. "I'll leave it in Wakanda. I don't need it to battle with Machida," said T'Challa while he watched from a window the deflated figure of Little as the man went onto the opposite street. Chapter 5. The Temple of Machida finished his monthly national sermon to his country with a short prayer. As he prayed, he could sense the millions of citizens who watched the broadcast on the internet, the television in their homes or the temple grounds, and heard it over the radio. He prayed for the deliverance of the country out of its present hardships. He was dressed in splendid robes and held a silver staff. His voice was tender, but the words pouring out of it carried the weight of the country's burden and future on it. After the prayer ended, Machida went to the inner shrine. Only him and those he permitted could enter the holy place. Machida began praying again. He was interrupted by a knock on the tall and decorated doors. He knew it had to be an extremely urgent matter for one of the clerics to seek him at that time. "Yes." "What is it?" he asked calmly upon reaching the thick wooden doors. "The Wakandans have sent a message, that they are on their way," said the cleric. "Good," said Machida as he turned the golden lock. Within moments he was in the north wing of the temple, where the political aspects of his duties were carried out. Once more he was alone. There he dressed in the ceremonial battle armor that his predecessors had worn. Machida was believed by his people to be the 100th incarnation of the spiritual founder of the former kingdom. It was believed that he possessed whatever powers and intelligence his predecessors had, all 100 of them. From birth Machida was made the head of the country, and from age 5 he began his reign. He was expected to follow the laid-out tenets of the nation's faith. However, he came into contact with an entity called Athuk. He grew up with the entity. Eventually he began calling it his master. It was recently that Athuk asked Machida to free him, so the pupil obliged. Machida waited for 2 hours for T'Challa and Ororo. In that time he received the footage of the couple's fight with Mark Namara just as he had planned. From the footage, Machida learned a great deal about his opponents. Therefore he developed in his mind a means of defeating the Black Panther and Storm. Then he received a message that they had entered Atha's airspace. Guide them to the temple, he told the Air Force commander. Afterwards Machida contacted the temple's director. Have the grounds evacuated forthwith, he commanded. I want some time alone. Chapter 6 I see that Mr. Little has spilled the beans, as the saying goes, said Machida as he observed that T'Challa's sword was absent. Doesn't matter, because I didn't want the sword in the first place. I already have a device to open the gateway. I'm really after Ororo. At that moment, T'Challa and Ororo, without saying a word to each other, knew that they had to change their battle plan. And it was abundantly clear what had to happen for them to find the device. They had to lose the first round convincingly. As for my loyal servant, Mark Namara, he has already escaped your imprisonment because all my followers are returned to me when they are captured, said Machida in a low voice. The quietness of the temple made the voice seem louder than it really was. Honey, could you please shut this guy up, said T'Challa. Gladly, said Ororo. In a heartbeat, Machida was frozen in ice. Experience told Ororo and T'Challa that he would be free in seconds. Therefore they moved away from the jet that was parked on the main temple plaza. T'Challa ran to the left while Ororo took to the sky. As expected, Machida's burning chi energy ripped through the ice prison. The Black Panther twirled the spear of Bashanga in his hand. The entire weapon was made from vibranium and it was quite heavy. T'Challa aimed its diamond-shaped head to Machida's rib cage. Then T'Challa shot forward. Machida spun out of the way, yet he was washed in plasma energy released by Ororo. His invisible shield protected him. Therefore he reached out of the inferno and he seized the spear of Bashanga. T'Challa exerted all his strength to prise the weapon from Machida's grip, but it was useless. Machida's strength surpassed his. Eventually Machida tore the spear from T'Challa's hold. Simultaneously he kicked T'Challa's knee, damaging it. With the Black Panther momentarily unsteady, Machida plunged the spear into him. However, T'Challa chose where the blade entered his body by shifting slightly. In Machida's eyes he had killed the Black Panther. To ensure his victory he delivered a vicious punch into T'Challa's throat. The Black Panther staggered and fell. T'Challa, Ororo screamed out. Machida faced her. Then he disappeared in a godlike speed. He leapt from the grounds in a manner that imitated flight. He went above Ororo and dropped a spaded hand across the side of her head, knocking her unconscious. As they fell, Machida caught her and landed gently. Mark Namara, help me, he said, taking out a transparent tube from his pocket, and he opened it. A blue mist came out of the bottle, and then it formed into Mark Namara. Take her and follow me, said Machida. Mark Namara obeyed. He held the Wind Rider across and carried her in front of his chest. Thereafter he walked out of the plaza with Machida. T'Challa allowed a few minutes to pass before he awakened from his meditation. The point of entry made by the blade was not as serious as it seemed. T'Challa estimated that he had a good half-hour before he would start to feel the effects. But if it were a normal man, then that person would have been indeed dead. He began to follow the scents of Ororo, Mark Namara, and Machida. He covered the wound with one hand while the other carried the spear. Yet it was his heart that hurt, and it would even more if he didn't find Ororo in time before anything else happened to her. Soon T'Challa was racing through the brilliant gardens and into the woodlands that were under the snow-capped mountains. His other concern was whether he would have the sufficient strength left to carry out the initial battle plan. T'Challa came upon his quarry in the depth of the woods. Machida had placed Ororo in the center of a ringed apparatus. Mark Namara was standing nearby. T'Challa guessed that Ororo was playing possum and was probably waiting on him to arrive. Must not keep her waiting, he thought. He leapt into an attack with a battle cry. It startled both Machida and Mark Namara. It also gave Ororo the opportunity to stop her acting, and she took the small throwing knife from her belt and stabbed it at Machida's neck. The blade broke on impact. Nonetheless, Ororo manipulated a sudden gust that pushed Machida away from her. Meanwhile, Mark Namara produced his mace and blocked T'Challa's lunge with the spear. It was a tactical move on the Black Panther's part. He wanted Mark Namara to block the blow. Seeing that the ploy worked, T'Challa locked the spear's shaft along the mace, thereby bringing Mark Namara to a standstill. Now for Ororo's part, thought T'Challa. He saw her fly out of the ring, and she came by Mark Namara's side. In her hand she held a few of the mini gas grenades that were meant for Machida. She threw them into Mark Namara's face and they exploded. T'Challa released Mark Namara, knowing that the chemicals were passing through the man's skin and into the bloodstream. Hopefully in 10 seconds he would be unconscious. T'Challa and Ororo were inoculated earlier against the colorless and odorless chemicals. Ororo looked at the wound her husband was holding. "Can you still catch him?" she asked. "Yes," said T'Challa. "He's coming now." Mark Namara slowly slumped forward while the couple spoke. The last thing he saw was Machida racing up behind T'Challa. Ororo couldn't see Machida because of his speed. "Take this," said T'Challa, and he handed the spear of Bashan-Ga over to Ororo. Afterwards, he spun around in time to see Machida. Gracefully, he ducked and swiveled to produce a low roundhouse kick into Machida's legs. Then T'Challa released his wound, because he wanted to use both hands. He got up so sharply that Machida was still falling by the time he rose. As expected, Machida attempted to make a reflex somersault to return to his feet. T'Challa tackled him in mid-process and placed him in a hold. It meant that for a brief moment Machida was unable to move. Therefore Ororo saw him, so she broke the remaining grenades in his face. Machida struggled like an untamable mustang. T'Challa's wound caused his strength to diminish. That enabled Machida to free himself. He got to his feet and coughed like he had the common cold. Ororo stared at him because he showed no signs of the chemicals overcoming him. "What kind of a monster are you?" she pondered. Machida felt dizzy and sick. His heart wanted him to fight on, yet wisdom told him he should rest a while. He turned away from Ring, which was placed in the spot that Athak had instructed. He ran towards the temple. T'Challa got to his feet and took out his kimoyo to call the jet. He glanced at the device, which was a relic. Ororo joined him. "We have to destroy this place," said Ororo. The jet came overhead just as Mark Namara's body turned into a blue cloud and disappeared. Storm lifted herself and T'Challa up to the jet on wind currents. Thereafter she released plasma energy from her hands. The energy exploded on the device and the surroundings like a daisy chain bomb. Machida heard the explosion, but he didn't care for the loss of the device. Because he had two lists of specific devices, one was Little's and the other came from another collector. On the second list were Thor's hammer, the Infinite Gauntlet and the Cosmic Cube. Story: Dark Alliance Chapter 1. The Asian country known as Uth, the President's house, Beyonder is his name, said Soberk. He is trapped on the fourth quadrant of the interdimensional sphere. I overheard him when he spoke to you. That is how I know about your connection to him. At the time I was on my way to find Balthazar. Soberk was aware that Machida contemplated the information and the person that gave it to him. Machida was a handsome young man in his early 20s. He was both the spiritual leader and president of his holy nation. The people of Uth believed that Machida was the 100th incarnation of the nation's first ruler. Machida was chosen for leadership from birth and he displayed fantastic powers like his predecessors. I can get him out of the dimensional prison for you, said Soberk. Why? Asked Machida. Because I want access to the Shangri Scrolls, replied Soberk. That is the reason I have been building up trust between you and me. Machida laughed. And here I thought you wanted to build trade relations between our two countries, said Machida, who wore holy garments. As we are open now, tell me, why did Balthazar choose you? He was created specifically to defend the Earth from a threat that in the end never materialized, and he was never relieved from that post. He was a sentry in a war that ended eons ago. I freed him from that burden, replied Soberk. Interesting, said Machida. So do we have a deal? Asked Soberk. The young man thought about the offer for a second. Yes, said Machida. Perfect, said Soberk. Then Soberk teleported in a sphere of fire from Machida's presence to his presidential house in the African country of Uranzi. Soberk quickly got on the phone with the White House in America and requested a meeting with U.S. President Ballinger. 30 minutes later, Soberk spoke with Ballinger. Good night, Mr. President, said Soberk. Good night to you also, Mr. President. What can I do for you? Asked Ballinger. I have alarming news. What is it? Machida, the leader of the nation called Uth, is about to release a level 1 threat on the Earth, said Soberk. I was making trade links with the country when I became suspicious. Level 1 threat, could you be more specific? Asked Ballinger. He is going to release Beyonder. When I was last in the Avengers headquarters, I saw the name as being a top priority. Things are clearer now and you are sure about Machida's involvement? Positively, replied Soberk. But why do you need me? You have Balthazar. Have you forgotten about the treaty I signed with the United Nations that debars me from using Omega weapons on other countries? Actually I did because America didn't sign it, said Ballinger. I need the Avengers to aid me in stopping Machida, said Soberk. Think of it as a joint strike between our two nations. You speak as though you are on the UN Security Council already. Your application is still under review, said Ballinger. It is only a matter of time when I will be seated next to you, said Soberk. Still I need proof before I approve anything to do with this Machida, said Ballinger. Time is not on our side. The time I will take to go back in to gather the information may be too late for the world, said Soberk. And as far as I understand, Beyonder has a lot of enemies in the United States and he may strike them first. Since you put it that way, then of course we will have to do something. I will send the Avengers in, said Ballinger. I will consult with my chief of staff before doing it though. Thank you, Mr. President, said Soberk. Soberk hung up and he reflected that his objective was not to dominate the world but rather to have certain changes made to its status quo. Chapter 2 Kenya, Ororo's grandmother's house carried an energetic charge. There was a sense of life and purity in the rooms that touched one's being. Ororo enjoyed her visits to the grandmother, although the present one was for the delivery of bad news. Ororo was seated in a sofa next to T'Challa while the grandmother sat in a chair opposite to them. The old lady wore a traditional wrapped kanga and a plate-like bead necklace. Her white hair was cut short. Her blues bombarded the observer with kindness. Her mutant ability to control the elements hadn't waned like her body, and it electrified the atmosphere in the house. "So what is the reason for this trip?" asked the grandmother. Ororo didn't know how to break the news, so she just laid it out. "I met Oya, the goddess of the weather," said Ororo. The grandmother's eyes widened in wonder and she leaned forward to hear more of the good news. "What is she like?" asked the grandmother, hungry for more than the morsels Ororo had given her. "I didn't get a chance to speak with her properly. Sobek apparently sent her away to another part of the universe or destroyed her," replied Ororo. The grandmother leaned back into the chair. Her face turned serious. "Sobek of Aranza did that?" asked the grandmother. "Yes, mother," replied Ororo. "He was in a place that he wasn't supposed to be in. Oya took T'Challa and I to confront him, and he was prepared for her." "What did you do to him?" asked the grandmother. "Nothing," answered Ororo. "Nothing," said the grandmother, and she got up swiftly. "Well, I will deal with him." "Slow down, mother," said T'Challa, while he sharply rose to meet the matriarch. "Ororo and I already tried to deal with Sobek permanently and it was unsuccessful. Please, mother, take back your seat. We need your advice on this matter," said Ororo gently. The grandmother's eyes glowed in a dim white color and then they returned to the normal blue shade. She retook her seat and listened. "We did some digging up of Sobek's past and we found that his mother and her people were mystics. His father, the former dictator of Aranza, had married the mother to keep her clan under his control. Then he suspected her of treachery and had her executed along with the clan," said Ororo. "Well, the fruit has not fallen far from the tree," quipped the grandmother. "So true, but have you ever heard about the mother's clan?" "They went by several names," said Ororo, and she handed the grandmother a list. "I don't see how this will help you," said the grandmother. "We are looking for the source of Sobek's power. I believe that it has to do with his ancestors," said Ororo. "That he is channeling their power," suggested the grandmother. "Yes," said Ororo. "It is possible," said the grandmother. "Why didn't the clan prevent their execution?" "A widely held belief was that they were against violence," replied Ororo. "I'm glad that I didn't take a vow of peace," said the grandmother. "There are times when force is the only way. We also have a theory that spirits of the mother's clan are in a particular place and he is drawing power from there," said T'Challa. "I have seen such a system before. So far we have studied Sobek's DNA and found the cells common in real mystics that give them the ability to vibrate their molecules in time with the universe," said Ororo. "That's all we had." "Well, I hope you succeed. If that is all the respect Sobek had for Oya, then he deserves to be punished," said the grandmother. "By the way, how is your sister-in-law?" "Good news, she will be out soon. A judge just has to reopen the case and acquit her," replied Ororo. The grandmother read through the list of names and she recognized two of them. Ororo and T'Challa took the information and then they departed. 1 hour later, T'Challa and Ororo hadn't seen their bed in days and they made the most it by stealing some pleasure out of their hectic lives. The couple made love like frisky teenagers, sometimes it was tender and other times it was rough. They both enjoyed the emotional release while a great deal of time elapsed from the day. When their energies were spent, they rested. Later, Instinct roused T'Challa from his sleep. He took a shower and then headed to the first floor of the house. He arrived just in time to meet Umba as the teenager entered the home. Umba aka Deadeye had joined his school's laser tag team and that made him return home late. "How was your first day?" asked T'Challa. "It was a lot more complicated than I thought," replied Umba. He was blind and the computerized visor that he wore provided him with information about his surroundings. "How?" asked T'Challa, while he went to the kitchen to get a cold drink for his apprentice and ward. "There are a lot of rules, team rules and individual rules. We have to battle in a holographic landscape that can change at any time like the battle cube you built for Ororo. That part is easy but it was those rules that took out the fun," replied Umba. "Well, it was your first day. You'll get better at it over time," said T'Challa. "Where's Ororo?" asked Umba. "Upstairs. What did our grandmother say?" "She asked for you and we got what we went for," replied T'Challa. "Has the judge released Shuri as yet?" asked the stocky 15-year-old. "In a day or two." "That must be really tough for her," said Umba. "It is sad that she has to be locked up for a crime that she didn't commit." "How does that make you feel?" "Angry, of course," replied T'Challa. "Well, everybody is talking about it." "What are people saying on the ground?" "You wouldn't like it," said Umba. "Really?" said T'Challa. "Yes, really," said Umba. "What is it?" "I heard that you were weak to allow the incarceration and that Shuri should have never gone to face the trial," replied Umba. "And you heard this in school?" "Yes, and I think they are saying the same thing on the internet. The people are entitled to their opinions and that kind of thing does not bother me, so next time you don't need to hold back," said T'Challa. "Okay. And what about the ban that the Americans placed on you and Ororo?" asked Umba. "That is still in force. When will they take it off?" "I don't know." "Don't you care?" "I care because it impedes Ororo," replied T'Challa. "But wasn't she born in America?" "They just can't ban her," said Umba. "Apparently they can," said T'Challa. "When are you going to call Shuri again?" "Tonight," replied T'Challa. "I want to talk to her." "No problem," said T'Challa. T'Challa pictured his younger sister. She had a medium haircut and her eyes were brown like chestnuts. She had been placed in the superhuman prison called the Raft. The prison was on an island in New York's East River. Shuri was given a special cell and privileges due to the strange nature of her incarceration. She was allowed a phone and other basic items. T'Challa started to prepare dinner for the boy. "What do you want to eat?" asked T'Challa. Umba told him and T'Challa prepared the meal while the lad went and changed. T'Challa's kimoyo rang. T'Challa left his cooking and he went to the counter to pick up the palm-held supercomputer. But Ororo answered the call on her kimoyo that was linked to T'Challa's. Shortly after, Ororo came down to the kitchen. Her white hair was in a ponytail and her eyes were blue. "You wouldn't believe who just called," said Ororo. "Who?" asked T'Challa. "Machida," replied Ororo, "and he wants our help." Chapter 3 Beware of strangers bearing gifts, muttered Machida. He slowly lit the ceremonial candles in the temple hall. Then he opened the hall for his 100 warrior priests to enter. They would pray for strength for the test he told them that was on its way. Machida left the temple and he went into the woods. In the seclusion of the night and the ancient trees, Machida stopped in the hollow grounds where his master first contacted him as a child. "You shall soon be free," said Machida. "What new methods have you come up with?" asked Beyonder. "A leader of a great nation will open the door," replied Machida. "His name is Soberk." "I don't know him." He saw you on the other side, said Machida. Strange, and he just offered his help, said Beyonder. And I am not convinced that he merely wants a simple trade for this deed, said Machida. But we have no choice but to trust him. He called you Beyonder. I have gone by many names. Beyonder being the name that the humans I had encountered before referred to me as. For what reason? It is because I am beyond any realm of understanding that they know. I was trapped here when I allowed myself to be devoured, replied Beyonder. And you will bring peace to the world as you promised, asked Machida. He wanted to hear sincerity in his master's voice. I will, said Beyonder. Machida was satisfied with the response. I will go now and prepare for your arrival, said Machida. I look forward to meeting you in the flesh, said Beyonder. Machida moved off and returned to the temple. On the way he thought about the meeting with Beyonder. I don't want peace in the world, thought Machida. His personal convictions and his loyalty to the Beyonder had clashed. How can one know peace without there being suffering? That is the reason that you Beyonder must stay in your prison. When Machida arrived, he looked over his praying warrior priests. They must be ready for when we face Sobek and whatever tricks he has in store, thought Machida. Still, he didn't like to leave anything to chance, so he decided to contact T'Challa and Ororo, even though they were his enemies. The Avengers lead Quinjet, Steve Rogers aka Captain America, had sent out a summons to all the Avengers except for Black Panther due to the government ban on T'Challa. The result of the summons was that there were 7 Quinjets loaded with Avengers headed for Earth. Tony Stark aka Iron Man met Captain America in the central room of the lead Quinjet. Stark was concerned about the Avengers' relationship with Sobek. T'Challa warned us about him, said Stark. Right now, T'Challa's word is pretty thin, said Rogers. I'm not the man's biggest supporter, but if he suspects something, generally he is right, said Stark. I have information that says otherwise, and let's leave it right there, said Rogers. All right, said Stark. Suddenly a sphere of fire appeared near to the men. There was no heat from the mystical fire and it soon subsided. Sobek appeared in the aftermath of the fire. His eyes were green, his skin was hard and brown. Rogers and the rest of the Avengers had worked with Sobek on numerous occasions. Rogers had never suspected Sobek of any wrongdoing. Good night, said Sobek. Thank you for the assistance. Thanks for giving us the heads up on Beyonder, said Rogers. All part of my duty to protect mankind, said Sobek. I will go ahead of you to meet Machida. Shouldn't we all go with you? Asked Stark. No. Machida expects me, and that way we can catch him in the act. Then we will have the proof needed to justify our action. Am I right, Captain America? Asked Sobek. Yes, responded Rogers, but he didn't like how quickly he said it. Sobek teleported into the temple, effecting a warm welcome. Instead, Machida and his warrior priests surrounded Sobek. The mystic read the young man's face. I see that plans have changed, said Sobek. Yes. I don't want Beyonder freed. And since you can free him, that means you must be dealt with, said Machida. Glad that we are on the same page, said Sobek, and he smiled. What? Asked Machida, slightly confused. I also don't want Beyonder free, for long, said Sobek. Then he muttered a spell. The warrior priests were set on fire by the spell. Then Sobek spat out another spell that took away Machida's speech and strength. Sobek pointed his right hand at Machida and an invisible force lifted the young man off the floor. Come, we have an appointment to keep, said Sobek. Machida struggled in vain like a worm on a fishing hook. Sobek teleported to the woods and dropped Machida unceremoniously. "Beyonder, it is time," said Soberk. Soberk shouted a spell that tore through the mystical locks that kept Beyonder at bay. A spiraling doorway to Beyonder's prison opened and the being slowly came through. Unknown to Soberk was that even though the warrior priests were killed by the fires, they were reincarnated and they returned to protect Machida. Soberk was caught off guard when several of the priests appeared next to the fallen Machida. The warriors carried battle maces and swords. They charged into Soberk with a supernatural speed. Soberk heard the engines of the Quinjets. "The Avengers have arrived," he muttered. Soberk had a few seconds to protect himself from the priest's onslaught. He created a weak force field around himself. The strength of the priests nevertheless knocked Soberk over. A lightning bolt strike from Thor scattered the priests. When the blinding light from the lightning bolt subsided, Soberk noticed that more of the priests had appeared. "Soberk!" shouted Iron Man, as he flew down shooting at the priests. "I'm all right," said Soberk. "Stop Machida." He opened the portal. A sound from the portal made Soberk look up at it. A dark, faceless humanoid being who seemed to have the very fabric of space wrapped around him exited the portal. Machida got to his feet and tried to push Beyonder back into the portal. But Beyonder quickly held him and sensed the betrayal. "I am disappointed." "Even you," said Beyonder. He tossed Machida into the portal as it closed. The warrior priests lost their connection with Machida and they exploded into a blue vapor. "Who is Soberk?" asked Beyonder. "I am," said Soberk, and he stood next to the being. "I want to speak with you in private, so freeze the Avengers in time." "As you wish," said Beyonder. He merely nodded and all the Avengers were placed in suspended animation. "Why have you freed me?" asked Beyonder. "I want the Shangri Scrolls." "You are the only one capable of getting them for me," replied Soberk. "Where are they?" "In the home of Doctor Strange in Manhattan, New York," replied Soberk. "I remember Doctor Strange," said Beyonder. "Bring the scrolls to me and the slate will be clean between us," said Soberk. "Where will you be?" "Right here," responded Soberk. "The scrolls are in the right wall next to the gargoyle statue that is on the first floor." "What about them?" asked Beyonder, and he pointed at the Avengers. "Free them." "They are no threat to you," responded Soberk. Beyonder teleported from the scene and the time suspension was halted. Soberk dropped on his knees as if exhausted. Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man raced towards him. "Where is Beyonder?" asked Steve Rogers. "He was babbling about Doctor Strange." "That he was going to destroy him," answered Soberk. "We have to get back to New York fast," said Rogers. "I can teleport us there," said Soberk, as he rose gingerly. "Good," said Rogers. At that point T'Challa and Ororo appeared. Chapter 4 Doctor Strange's Townhouse, Manhattan, New York. Beyonder found that entry into the Sorcerer Supreme's house was quite easy. Magical symbols and items decorated the first floor. Beyonder found the hiding place of the Shangri Scrolls. He manipulated the molecules in the walls so that a hole was formed. Then Beyonder mentally levitated the scrolls in his hands. That was a mistake. Upon touch, the scrolls reacted negatively with Beyonder's composition. The molecules in the house became unstable as Beyonder transformed. That triggered simultaneous attacks on the X-Men headquarters and the Fantastic Four building by demonic creatures. T'Challa demanded to know Machida's whereabouts. "He was sent into the portal that Beyonder came out of," replied Thor. "How convenient." "It was Soberk who freed Beyonder," said T'Challa. "Hold on with the allegations," said Captain America as he stepped in front of the Black Panther. "Soberk was under attack when we got here." Most likely Machida was trying to stop Soberk, said Ororo. These are lies, said Soberk. And while we are here arguing, Beyonder is halfway across the world. You're right, said Captain America. But if T'Challa is telling the truth, you will have hell to pay. Well then let's go, said Soberk. Iron Man interrupted. I just got information from my satellites of a massive energy emission at Doctor Strange's home. T'Challa and Ororo, you are still banned from entering America, so I can't permit you to come, said Rogers. Don't let Soberk go with you, said T'Challa. I'm telling you this as a friend. In a situation like this I have to trust my judgment, and mine is to go to New York, said Rogers. Then let Soberk remain, said T'Challa. I cannot do that, said Rogers. He is here by the request of the President of the United States. T'Challa stared venomously at Soberk. Harm any one of them and I will kill you, said T'Challa. You already tried. Remember, said Soberk. With that, Soberk teleported the Avengers to Doctor Strange's residence. Ban or no ban, we are going to New York, said Ororo. We are going to need backup to take on both Beyonder and Soberk. I'll call the X-Men, said Ororo. Also we need Shuri, said T'Challa. Ororo folded her arms. You want to break her out? We have no time to wait on the courts, said T'Challa. Soberk has led the Avengers into a trap. We are the only ones left to stop him. Well, we have no time to plan a proper breakout, said Ororo. Agreed, that's why we have to go in now, said T'Challa. Their chemoyos beeped. The intelligence agency reported that spy satellites picked up the attacks on the X-Men and Fantastic Four headquarters. I'm guess that this is tied to Soberk, said Ororo. He took out all the major American superhuman groups in one stroke, said T'Challa. We definitely need Shuri on this then, said Ororo. I'll call her, said T'Challa. Chapter 5. Shuri was wide awake when her phone rang. She heard the annoying and faint electrical noise on the line that indicated that the conversation was monitored. Shuri, said T'Challa. T'Challa. Remember the red trees, said T'Challa. Shuri couldn't believe that T'Challa had just told her to meet him immediately. She kept her composure as not to alert the guards monitoring from the security camera. I remember them, said Shuri. Mother took us out there so many times. How are you? asked T'Challa. Counting down the time, replied Shuri. Well, take care. I will call back tomorrow, said T'Challa. Good night. Good night. Shuri figured she had 10 minutes before the people monitoring figured out that the conversation was cryptic. She grinned slightly because she needed 5 minutes to get out of the cell. She hung up the phone and headed for the first security camera. The device was on the wall facing her. She jumped and smashed the camera's lens with her right fist. Then she went to the second camera that was hidden in a lower wall. She had spotted it with her hyper eyesight when the lights had gone off. She crashed a chair leg into the hidden camera. Then she went for the lights. At that moment she sensed the sleeping gas that was released by the guards. Halothane gas, said Shuri. She was capable of holding her breath for 30 minutes by slowing down her heart rate. She destroyed the lights, and she created a decoy out of her bunk. She rested the decoy next to the door. The sleeping gas engulfed the cell and Shuri stood in the corner as she concentrated on her heart rate. Eventually the guards came and they entered with flashlights. The guards took the decoy for Shuri and they attacked it. Shuri took the opportunity and headed into the guards. She quickly subdued them and took their weapons. The Thunderbolts will be here soon, thought Shuri. She stepped out of the cell into a corridor. She sprinted to her left, avoiding the blast doors that were closing. She was on the 5th level of the prison. Above her was the command center, the guards' quarters, prison cells, and a recreation room. There were no windows. Elevators provided most of the transport and they were useless to Shuri in her situation. An explosion in the wall stopped Shuri. The wall had imploded inwards. That meant the source of the explosion was outside of the prison. Shuri looked through the hole and she saw the East River rushing down a passage towards her. The blast doors finally closed Shuri off from the corridor. The cold water quickly filled the pocket. She swam out the passage as quickly as she could. Suddenly Shuri felt as though the water had a mind of its own. An underwater current sucked Shuri out of the raft prison. The undercurrent grabbed onto Shuri and it carried her to the surface. She inhaled deeply as she met the fresh air. "Grab my hand," said Ororo as she swooped down on thermal air currents. Shuri followed the order and she grabbed onto Ororo. Shuri noticed that Ororo was as wet as her. "That was you down there?" asked Shuri. "Yes," said Ororo, as she carried them into the sky. "And some anti-metal vibranium to deal with the adamantium walls. What is going on? Why are you in America?" "Soberk released Beyonder and he tricked the Avengers into going after the being," replied Ororo. Ororo accelerated. "Storm, look," said Shuri, and she pointed at the city. New York City was losing power. The city that never slept was thrown into darkness. People were pouring into the streets. Vehicles stopped moving as their batteries were suddenly drained of energy. "Where are we going?" asked Shuri. "To Doctor Strange's place. Beyonder and the Avengers are there," replied Ororo. Ororo's Kimoyo rang and she answered it. Shuri believed that it was T'Challa on the other end. "We are just about there," said Ororo. A few moments later, Ororo and Shuri landed on a building that was a block away from Doctor Strange's townhouse. T'Challa was staring in the direction of the townhouse. Shuri was astonished by the sight. Buildings on the townhouse block floated upside down and some of them were joined together like they were pieces in an abstract art painting. The region was totally devoid of any sign of life. "The Avengers are inside of there," said T'Challa, and he handed a bag that contained Shuri's commando gear over to her. "Suit up, we have work to do," said T'Challa coldly. Next story, A Thin Red Line PTI story. A Thin Red Line PTI Chapter 1 T'Challa, why do you care so much about the Avengers? You don't need them and they certainly don't need you. You are an African head of state and they are Americans. Still you try to force yourself into their group and culture. It is not like Ororo's case with the X-Men. She was born in America and lived most of her life there. On the other hand, you will always be an outsider, a man from a different world, an alien. And why are you fighting for Westerners? Their ideology is different to yours. They are 10% of the world's population and control 90% of the world's resources. You should be fighting for the other side. Do you hear me, T'Challa? You should be against them. I heard a voice in my head that sounded like Soberk's. But the words were from my subconscious. My rational mind was trying to understand my motive for heading into a trap devised by Soberk so that I could rescue the Avengers. I have rescued my comrades on several occasions in the past, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the thought that I would fail. Looking on from the outside, I would have also thought that an African head of state working alongside an American and government-sanctioned superhuman group would be nonsensical. But the members of the Avengers were equal to me in some way. Tony Stark, the Iron Man, ran a billion-dollar multinational company that was practically a country in its own right. Thor was a prince from another dimension. Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, embodied the noble ideals of a nation like me. Hank Pym was a scientific god. The rest of the Avengers were rebels and social outcasts. They may have worked for the government, but they didn't care much for it at times. The Avengers were mostly concerned with the safety of Earth's citizens. I also shared the belief and I gravitated towards the group. Should I have given up my head of state duties and moved full-time to America? No. The reason was that I was in a position of power that the others didn't have. When I was on trips to America for award ceremonies, guest lectures, invention conventions, and donations, the other superheroes could easily call me for a team-up on a mission. I had connections and technologies that were beyond America's, and that gave us an edge. I made good friends in the Avengers, and I also made others suspicious of me. It was not an easy road that I had taken. Much like the one I had found myself on when I entered the block of townhouses in Lower Manhattan on a still night. All the buildings floated upside down. There were no traces of people, which concerned me. The rest of New York City was plunged into darkness and chaos. Ororo and Shuri had taken different routes towards Doctor Strange's mansion. I was headed for the front of the mansion. I still hadn't figured out Soberk's ultimate goal. Soberk had released Beyonder and fooled the Avengers into going after the interdimensional being. But to what end? I knew that Soberk pretended to care about people, and that appearance had got him into the Avengers. Soberk was a super-powered African head of state like me. One difference between us was that I was scientifically minded while he was mystical. The questions in my head continued as I arrived in front of the mansion. The Beyonder was inside, and the Avengers had followed him in there. I didn't know what caused the mansion to be overturned. I nimbly leapt onto the mansion's roof like it was the limb of a sansag tree in Wakanda. I unsheathed the anti-metal claws in my gloves and proceeded to climb to the nearest window. Breaking into Doctor Strange's home was risky even in normal circumstances. The mansion was a supernatural prison and a gateway to other worlds. Rooms inside the mansion may have contained spell traps and imprisoned anomalies. With those thoughts in mind, I entered through a window. I relied on my night vision because the mansion was in darkness. I drew from memories of past visits to the mansion, and that aided my navigation of the hallways. The ground was littered with broken sculptures and other damaged decorations. I was surprised by the stiffness of the silence in the house. Could the place be completely vacant? I pondered. Ororo and Shuri should have made their entries into the house, and I expected to meet up with them soon. I tried to find the sense of my comrades or Soberk, but there weren't any. I became concerned that they may have gone to another dimension. Chapter 2 Ororo. This mission had turned personal for me because of what Soberk had done to Oya, the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. T'Challa and Shuri were entering the house from different points. I was headed for the back. I remembered when T'Challa and I came up with the idea for the permanent removal of Soberk from the Earth. We didn't want to kill him in cold blood, since that was not our code of conduct, so we cloned him and placed the real Soberk in a coma. When Soberk returned, T'Challa and I promised to deal with him even harsher. Has the time come to put ethics aside on this issue, no matter the consequences? I contemplated. The surreal atmosphere of a mansion turned upside down broke my concentration. Dark magic was not the reason for the bizarre position of the mansion. I sensed that the natural electromagnetic force had been sent out of balance. I glided on thermal wind currents towards the rear door. I found that the door was locked. I took a lockpick from my tiara and used it to open the door. As the door slowly creaked, reality finally struck me. T'Challa, Shuri, and I were the last great heroes left. We were the metaphorical, the thin red line that stood between the world and the threat of Beyonder and Soberk. The inside of the mansion reminded me of a black hole. Not that the interior was just in darkness, but rather I felt like I was being pulled forward by the mystery that the mansion held. I was familiar with Beyonder because destroying him was my first mission as leader of the X-Men. Ironically, I stopped Rachel Phoenix Summers from decimating the universe in order to eliminate Beyonder. In the end, Beyonder spared us and left. The further on that I walked, the greater my curiosity grew as to Doctor Strange's whereabouts. I had not seen him with the other Avengers in Earth. I presumed that his absence was due to Sobek. I should have been afraid at that point, but I was not. The thought of being fearful of Sobek sickened me. No matter how powerful he became, it would never intimidate me. I was not even afraid of Sobek's Omega weapon Balthazar. I figured that the great being would be introduced in the scheme of things in the near future. T'Challa and I hadn't devised a plan to deal with Balthazar as yet, and we required more information before proceeding. The Shangri Scrolls were another source of concern. Sobek wanted them in return for freeing Beyonder. T'Challa and I were informed that the Shangri Scrolls were mystical artifacts from an extraterrestrial race. Only a holy person was capable of reading the scrolls. Sobek was definitely not holy, and I felt the need for a shower every time that he was in my presence. Chapter 3 Shuri. When I was a child, the world revolved around Wakanda. As an adult, I learned that the world revolved around America. World War II and the 9/11 attacks cemented that impression. If that was not enough, every alien invasion, interdimensional rip and superhuman upheaval occurred on American soil. Small wonder that the world's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, were based in America. Wakanda had her share of action in the past, but not as frequent as in the United States. I didn't know a great deal about Dr. Stranger and his mansion. I slipped into the house via a side window. I expected all sorts of defenses, luckily there were none. I drew my mini sonic cannon and placed it on standby. The sense of unnatural geometry soon kicked in. I literally walked on the ceiling and made my way upward towards what would ordinarily be the foyer. I leapt onto the steps of upside-down stairs and climbed with my energy daggers towards the designated area. I even had fun doing it. Being a stealth master, I sensed movement in the darkness. T'Challa and Ororo had found me. I saw Ororo's eyes as they glowed in the dark. T'Challa quietly came up to my right side. My older brother and my sister-in-law were more experienced with the situation that we faced than me. "Any sign of the Avengers?" asked T'Challa. "No," I replied. Ororo also responded in the negative. "And Doctor Strange is not here either," she added. "So what now?" I inquired. T'Challa pondered and then he said, "We are missing a crucial element to this picture." "So let's recap," said Ororo. "We met Sobek and the Avengers in Earth. Then they teleported here." "That's it," said T'Challa. "We saw Sobek teleport the Avengers and we assumed that it was here that they came to because Sobek had said so." "Meaning he could have taken them somewhere else," said Ororo. "Exactly," said T'Challa. "And what about Beyonder?" I asked. "He isn't here." "Right now your guess is as good as mine," said T'Challa. I had hardly ever seen my brother stumped by a mystery. The disappearance of the Avengers had him at his wits' ends. "Well, we can't stay here while our friends are in danger," said Ororo. "I'm going to help the X-Men." "Take this," said T'Challa, while he detached his time-space sword from his back. "I'll go to the Fantastic Four's aid. Shuri, you wouldn't mind remaining in case something happens." The thought of staying idly in the mansion was vexing to me, yet I was a team player, so I accepted the request. "We'll meet back here," said Ororo. "Okay," I said. Then Ororo used the sword to teleport to the X-Men headquarters and T'Challa left the mansion. Chapter 4 The Spiritual Dwelling of Sobek's Clan. When Dr. Alex Sobek was 6 years old, his father took him to see an execution. Sobek's half-brother, who was 11 at the time, was also present. Soberk's father was a dictator and he personally executed dissidents in secluded areas. Soberk witnessed a man dragged from a tray of a van by soldiers. The man was bounded and a blindfold covered his eyes. Soberk's father committed the murder with a pistol. At age 6, Soberk had lost the value of life. Even when he became a medical doctor, the life of others had no meaning to him. He had merely acquired a lucrative and prestigious skill. With such a dim perspective of the lives of others, Soberk contemplated on which Avenger to kill. The 40 Avengers were in suspended animation and they were being brainwashed by Soberk's reprogramming. Soberk finally decided on the victims. The first was Amadeus Cho, the friend of Hercules. The second was Firestar. Soberk told the other Avengers how their comrades died in battle and then he tested the story. "Captain America," said Soberk, as he pointed to the man. "Tell me what happened to Firestar." Captain America came to life, yet he was under Soberk's spell. "We encountered Beyonder in Doctor Strange's home. In the ensuing battle, Beyonder disintegrated Firestar," said Captain America. "Perfect," said Soberk, and he pointed a finger at Captain America. "Return to your idleness." Captain America reverted into a stone-like position. As for Beyonder, he was dead. The Shangri scrolls had scattered the part of the universal being that made him sentient. Soberk took comfort in that thought. Soberk strolled over to Doctor Strange, who was also in suspended animation. Doctor Strange was the Successor Supreme and he possessed the Eye of Agamotto. Soberk had met Doctor Strange to discuss magical matters. From those discussions, Soberk learned about the Shangri scrolls. Admittedly, Doctor Strange was a more experienced master of magic than Soberk was. However, Soberk had an advantage. When Soberk's mother and her mystical clan were executed by the father's army, the mystics did not defend themselves. They knew that in death their powers would increase. Their souls went to the dwelling called Nwikaji. In that place the souls were able to travel into the future and throughout the universe. A great knowledge base was therefore created. As the clan's descendant, Soberk had access to the mystical knowledge base. He didn't need years to learn complex spells because his ancestors gave him the insights. Soberk was then able to capture Doctor Strange with magic and a deception. For what purpose? Soberk surveyed the Avengers. Every one of them would have tried to stop his quest. But why? "I'm not committing any major crime," he thought. "I'm not trying to take over the world or destroy it. I'm not even after money or fame. I'm doing this to rectify an imbalance in world politics. My cause is justified, it is only the means that is a thin line between good and evil." Soberk didn't like working with the Avengers. He had nothing in common with them and he felt he was belittling himself to work with the government's hired help. Soberk looked at the 15-year-old Amadeus Cho and destroyed the youngster. Then Soberk destroyed Firestar. He turned to Ms. Marvel. She was a blonde woman who was in her early 30s. She was also the former leader of the Avengers and an American national hero. Her superhuman powers included durability. "You will do nicely," said Soberk. He wanted Ms. Marvel as a witness to collaborate his story. He also wanted her badly injured so she would be too weak to significantly take part in the upcoming battle. Soberk planted his lies into her mind. Then he summoned his mystical strength and he bashed Ms. Marvel around. When he was done, Ms. Marvel laid on the floor. Then Soberk prepared his demons for their attack on Washington, D.C. Afterwards, Soberk took Ms. Marvel up in his hands and he teleported to the White House in Washington, D.C. He appeared at the front gate and he caused an instant commotion as the Secret Service scrambled to his location. He held Ms. Marvel heroically in his hands. It took a few minutes before the Secret Service allowed Soberk to meet with President Bollinger. Ms. Marvel had awakened while they waited. Soberk helped her walk as they entered the meeting room. "What happened?" asked Bollinger. "The Beyonder was more than we had bargained for," replied Soberk. "He's correct," said Ms. Marvel. "The Avengers are trapped." The meeting room shook violently. A Secret Service agent stormed into the room. "Mr. President, the White House is being attacked," said the agent. 5 other agents entered the room and took hold of Bollinger. "We have to get you to the bunker," said an agent. "Mr. President, grant my team permission to operate on American soil," said Soberk, "since no other teams are available." "Do it," said Bollinger. "But Ms. Marvel will work alongside you." "Not a problem," said Soberk. Bollinger was taken by his agents and he disappeared down the corridor. Soberk activated a signal card that summoned his superhuman team from across Africa. "Let's go outside. My people will meet us," said Soberk. "All right," said Ms. Marvel. Soberk and her exited the White House, which was not under any attack. The giant demonic creature was attacking the other side of the street. Chapter 5 X-Men Headquarters. Storm arrived in the heat of the X-Men's battle with Soberk's demon. The combined efforts of the mutants were insufficient to harm the demon because the monster was intangible at times and it was invulnerable to psi attacks. The beast rampaged through the several levels of the headquarters. Cyclops did his best to lead the X-Men and aid the wounded. Storm learned that the demon was in the center level of the headquarters and she headed to the location. She encountered the junior X-Men and some of the wounded. Her rage was ripened by the time she got to the level that the demon was on. "Soberk, you will answer for this," said Ororo. The demon came into her sights and she charged into it with the sword. She decapitated the demon with the sword's dark force energy blade. The demon died and disintegrated. "Storm?" Cyclops shouted. "Cyclops, I believe that a personal enemy of mine was behind this attack," said Storm. "Also, the Beyonder is free and the Avengers have disappeared." "Slow down," said Cyclops. "I will explain in detail while we tend to the wounded," said Storm. Cyclops listened to Ororo's story as they gathered the X-Men. "I'm sorry that I doubted your decision on Soberk's treatment," said Cyclops. "It's water under the bridge. We have to be ready to deal with Beyonder whenever he reappears," said Ororo. "We'll be ready," said Cyclops. "But from what I understand, the X-Men didn't fare so well with Beyonder." Ororo was unsure if Cyclops had just taken a swipe at her leadership tenure. He was elsewhere nursing his loss to her in combat when Beyonder had shown up. Ororo brushed the uncertainty aside. "That's correct. I'm hoping that T'Challa can get the Fantastic Four to help us," said Ororo. "Why do I have the feeling that will not be enough?" asked Cyclops. "Furthermore, how will Soberk deal with Beyonder?" "He may use Balthazar," replied Ororo. "On American soil. Right now I'm not putting anything beyond him," said Storm. New York City, T'Challa was at ease in the urban jungle while he ran and leapt from rooftop to rooftop like a free runner. When the need arose, he acrobatically used electrical pole wires to get across streets. He saw the explosions in the Fantastic Four's Baxter skyscraper in the distance. "I have to hurry," muttered T'Challa. 10 minutes later, the Black Panther arrived at the base of the Baxter skyscraper. He then started the hard climb to the summit. He didn't know what type of demon the creature was or if he had the resources necessary to defeat it. He kept in mind that he had the option to build a solution since Reed Richards aka Mr. Fantastic's laboratory was well stocked with advanced technology. T'Challa's endurance was tested as he got closer to the battle. Glass and flames fell on him. He heard shouting and the demon's roars. He slipped through a broken window and he met Reed's 2 preteen children. Uncle T'Challa, said Valeria Richards. Mommy and Daddy are upstairs, said Franklin Richards. T'Challa realized that the kids had mechanized backpacks on. You have to get to safety, said T'Challa. Actually, Mommy told us to teleport to Wakanda and to stay with you and Auntie Ororo, said Valeria. But since you are here, then we don't have anywhere else to go, said Franklin. Go to my home in Wakanda. You will meet my ward Umba. Tell him everything and he will take care of you, said T'Challa. Okadoke, said Valeria. She pressed a button on her backpack strap and then she vanished. Franklin followed her and he too vanished. T'Challa picked up the scents of the parents along with Johnny Storm and Ben the Thing Grim. The Black Panther ran to his friends and he found them in battle with an intangible demon. Reed Richards was trying to build a weapon while the rest of the family combated the monster. T'Challa went to his friend. T'Challa, how did you? Never mind, I need help on this protoplasma nullifier, said Richards. I met your kids and they have gone to Wakanda. My ward will supervise them, said T'Challa. Thanks. Now let's get rid of this demon, said Richards. Doctor Strange's mansion. Shuri didn't hear the intruder. She saw a light slip through the solid wall. It was a super-powered human. The person was a woman and her right hand glowed. At first glance, Shuri thought that the person was an Avenger and she was about to come out of her crouched position in the corner. Then Shuri recognized the person's uniform from the Thunderbolts. That was the group that guarded her in the raft prison. Moonstone, thought Shuri. Shuri remembered that the signal tracker that was implanted in her was destroyed by Ororo's electromagnetic blast. So Moonstone is probably here to check out the mansion, thought Shuri. Something else moved in the darkness. Shuri sensed its form. It was humanoid and very quiet. The new intruder went up to Moonstone's face and caught her by surprise. It held her left arm roughly. Where is Soberk? The being asked Moonstone. The woman retaliated by firing an energy blast at point blank into the creature. But the creature was unharmed. The creature flung Moonstone away and she slipped through a solid wall due to her intangibility. The creature then turned directly into Shuri's direction. She armed her sonic wave cannon and turned on her Kimoyo for T'Challa and Ororo to hear what was going on. You there, said the creature. Where is Soberk? Shuri slowly rose. Who are you? She asked. I'm called Beyonder. Chapter 6 I don't know where Soberk is, said Shuri. What game is he playing? First he frees me, then he tries to kill me, said Beyonder. He was an arm length away from Shuri. Backstabbing seems to be his modus operandi, said Shuri. And who are you? Asked Beyonder. Shuri. And why are you here? Waiting for you or Soberk, replied Shuri. Beyonder looked her over. You don't look capable of challenging me, said Beyonder. I didn't plan on challenging you. Good for you, said Beyonder. So what now? Asked Shuri. I'm going to find Soberk, replied Beyonder. I can't let you go free, said Shuri. Beyonder leaned forward. Why is that? Beyonder inquired. You are a danger to world, answered Shuri. That was in the past. My time spent in seclusion has given me a new perspective. I will bring peace to this world. I've heard the same promise before by beings like you, said Shuri. They never amounted to anything. Are you always this negative? Yes, replied Shuri. Human humor, it is such a pleasant thing, said Beyonder. Farewell, Shuri. Shuri knew that she was no match for Beyonder. Either he was about to kill her or leave. She couldn't decide in that fleeting moment. There is an alternative, said Shuri. Like what? You can lay low instead of roaming about. What do you mean by lay low? Not to do anything for a while and to stay in one place like here for example, replied Shuri. I don't have the patience for such things, said Beyonder. Well, develop it, said Shuri, cause I'm not letting you outside. How so when I can walk right through you, said Beyonder. Beyonder became intangible and he entered Shuri's body. She felt as though her soul had been invaded. Then Beyonder walked out of Shuri's back and he became tangible. You see, said Beyonder, and he turned to her. Take it from me, you should keep a cool head, said Shuri. Soberk tried to kill you once, he may be able to do it again. The Shangri scrolls were the closest he would have ever come to destroying me, said Beyonder. What exactly happened? Asked Shuri. The scrolls were much like me. They were created from the weaving of the essence of many dimensions. When I came in contact with the scrolls, they tried to absorb me and when I resisted I was ripped apart. But unlike the scrolls I'm relatively infinite. Hold on. Why were you after the scrolls? Soberk wanted them in return for freeing me. And you weren't aware of their danger? No, I now understand their nature, replied Shuri. Do you know what became of the people who lived around here? They must have perished when my sentience was dispersed. How can you sound like that? Asked Shuri. Like what? Like those people were insignificant. In a sense they are. I perceive the world on so many levels that it is impossible to describe. What may be significant for you may not be for me. You said that you wanted to bring peace to the world, that means bringing peace to people. Then they must have significance to you, said Shuri. The peace that I will bring to world does not involve humans, said Beyonder. Shuri could not hide her shock. What do you intend to do? You shall see in time, replied Beyonder. Chapter 7 Washington, D.C. Soberk and the 15 members of his superhuman team battled two demons in the sky above the Capitol. Ms. Marvel had retired hurt. Soberk teleported onto the group's airship the Knisna and he spoke with the pilot, Emigwali. Emigwali had the ability to transfer his body into any electronic device. The Knisna was invented by him. During the battle he used his vantage point to coordinate the attacks. Soberk came for an update. How are we doing? Asked Soberk. There has been a 70% drop in the demon's energy levels, replied Emigwali. Soberk was pleased. He didn't alter the demons to make it easier for the team, and the beasts were more powerful than the ones that struck the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. The team's impeding victory came from their hard work and focus. I have given you the opportunity and you have taken it, thought Soberk. Soberk knew that the team would have been displeased that their fortune was due to his scheme. The team members were genuinely noble people and they aimed to help the world. Hence Soberk had removed the obstacles that stood in the team's path to the grand stage. And integrally he would have changed the developing nation's perception of themselves with regards to their power in the world. Is Ms. Marvel still recuperating? Asked Soberk. Emigwali mentally scanned through the ship's system and he saw Ms. Marvel as she rested. She is still down, said Emigwali. All right, since victory is in hand here. I will search for the Avengers, said Soberk. Tell the others. You say victory. But when I look at the property damage and the loss of life on the ground I cannot call this a victory, said Emigwali. Call it whatever way that pleases your conscience, said Soberk. Then Soberk teleported from the ship and into his ancestor's domain. His mother was waiting for him. The mother was in a spirit form and she floated towards Soberk. He had lost his mother when he was 7 years old. He had kept his mother's youthful image in his mind and he was glad that she resembled the same person who had loved him as a child. "Why are these humans here?" asked the mother. "I'm taking them back now actually except for one," said Soberk. "And you have conjured demons," said the mother. "Only to right wrongs," said Soberk. "Darling, we have given you great power, please use it wisely," said the mother, and she disappeared. "I'm doing exactly that," muttered Soberk. He relished the thought that one day his soul would reside in the domain. Soon the distraction passed and Soberk continued with his work. He was leaving Doctor Strange behind for the last part of his plan. Soberk then teleported the Avengers to Doctor Strange's mansion. X-Men headquarters. The structural integrity of the headquarters was undermined by the demon's attack. Cyclops and the able-bodied X-Men had to remain to repair the damage. Aurora left for Doctor Strange's mansion. Storm sensed Beyonder's presence and she flew towards it. "I have to get there in time," said Storm. Storm entered the room where Beyonder and Shuri spoke. Beyonder recognized Aurora. "The X-Men leader," said Beyonder. "I learned so much from your mutants." Then Beyonder saw the sword. "You still want to stop me," said Beyonder. "I have no choice," said Storm. She looked at Shuri, who had eased away from Beyonder. "Do you really think that your sword can harm me?" asked Beyonder. "It has done amazing things in the past. Cutting you will not come as a surprise to me," replied Storm. She sensed a temporal shift in the room. T'Challa appeared soon after with a teleportation backpack strapped to him. "I remember you from Warworld," said Beyonder. "As I remember you," said T'Challa. "So it is the three of you and a sword against me," said Beyonder. Suddenly Storm sensed strong magic in the vicinity. It had occurred in the room above. Beyonder vanished. "He's going upstairs," said Storm with Shuri. "I'll make a path," said Shuri, and she fired the cannon into the ceiling. Storm created a mini tornado that lifted the group through the hole that was created. Light was on the next floor. So too were the Avengers, Soberk and Beyonder. The Avengers were awake and dazed. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, and the Hulk were quickly onto Beyonder's presence. In Soberk's brainwashing, the Avengers were led to believe that Beyonder was destroyed. Storm noticed Soberk's surprise to see the entity. "Soberk!" shouted Beyonder, and he created an invisible barrier around him and Soberk. Storm saw the barrier due to her extrasensory abilities and she flew into it. She slashed with the sword and a tear appeared. The Black Panther and Shuri raced in behind Storm while she entered the barrier. At that moment, Soberk created a teleportation sphere of fire. Beyonder, Storm, Black Panther and Shuri leapt into the sphere and they disappeared along with Soberk. The group reappeared in the Ancestors' domain. "It ends now," said Beyonder, as he channeled his powers at Soberk. Next story, A Thin Red Line PT2 Chapter 1 Soberk. The spiritual realm of Soberk's ancestors. When a loved one suddenly dies, it is then that you realize that the moments spent with that person were truly precious. So it was for me. Everything happened in a blur after the teleportation. After my mind had reacquainted itself with the empty space of my ancestors' realm, I realized that my enemies Beyonder, Aurora, T'Challa and Shuri had followed me from Doctor Strange's mansion. I sensed that Beyonder was eager to kill me for the betrayal. I summoned a transparent force field around myself. Beyonder released raw intergalactic power from his body and he channeled it through his hands towards me. I realized that my shield would not withstand Beyonder's force. Then in an instant, my mother and my ancestors appeared between me and Beyonder's attack. My ancestors took the brunt of the attack and my shield was broken. I felt the strong spiritual connection that I had with my mother and the ancestors snap. I had lost them. They had sacrificed themselves for me and I had lost my mother for a second time. Rage boiled in me. I created my greatest spell and it plucked Beyonder from where he stood and returned him to his dimensional prison. T'Challa, Ororo, and Shuri converged on me. I was too stricken with grief and momentarily drained to fight them, so I retreated. I teleported in a sphere of fire to Raven's house that was in my home country of Aranzi in Africa. I didn't know where Raven was located in her headquarters. I didn't bother to look. I fell to the floor and laid on my back. Then I wept for my mother. I heard Raven's footsteps. The young spy master came over me. I stopped crying and I looked up at her. What happened? Raven asked telepathically. I killed my mother, I replied. Raven gave me a hand in getting up. I stood and stared into her green eyes. She simply wiped the tears from my face. There was no shame intended in the gesture. I felt her understanding of the situation. Did your mother's loss have to do with this plan? Asked Raven verbally. Yes, I replied. Raven hugged me and her bright red hair brushed against me burnt face. She was like the little sister that I never had. This may sound inconsiderate, said Raven, but you must treat her as collateral damage. It is the only thing that will help you in the coming hours. I pulled her off of me. What are you saying? You didn't expect to launch such a large-scale and high-risk plan without paying a price on your part, said Raven. I released her. I've been following the news. Your superhuman team is in Washington, D.C. saving the U.S. president, said Raven. I'm fully aware that you had something to do with that. I no longer care about the plan, I said. No plan was worth the price of my mother. Raven folded her arms. So what are going to do now? Asked Raven, and she continued. Your ancestors are gone. That means that you have lost your magical advantage. It also means that you will have to rely on Balthazar even more. Fortunately, I'm leaving shortly to deal with Balthazar's weakness. Because I depend on you and you depend on Balthazar. Right now you have to follow through on the idea that made you do these things. There is a paradigm shift in the world. You and your country can be leaders in this change of the world order. You have to overcome this setback and take up the mantle. All this works to your benefit, doesn't it? I asked. Yes, replied Raven. The gap between the first world and the second world has narrowed. With that brings a shift in political and military power. I can use that to my advantage to make the world safer. I can't do this anymore, I said. Soberk, you are like a brother to me. I empathize with your regret, but you have to become something more than a man. You have to become an idea to inspire others to act, said Raven. Your mother would be proud of it. Then Raven walked away. I used my magic to create a chair and a table. There I sat and rested my head. I had a mess to fix. The Avengers had seen Beyonder, even though I had fooled them into believing that he was dead. I would have to explain that, and I had to deal with T'Challa, Ororo, and Shuri. I have to speak to the US president before they do, I said. Also, the final part of the plan was yet to be completed. My team's defeat of the demons would not suffice. The final act would cement my team's place in the world. The plan involved Doctor Strange's demon called Zim and the sacrificed spirits of Firestorm and Amadeus Cho. I had to return to the painful dimension where my clan perished in order to retrieve Doctor Strange. But I teleported to Washington, D.C. first. Chapter 2 Doctor Strange's Mansion. The Black Panther, Storm, and Shuri teleport back to the mansion while the Avengers were still wondering what had happened to them. T'Challa carried a comatose Doctor Strange. Ororo held T'Challa's time-space sword that allowed the teleportation. Captain America, the leader of the Avengers, wanted answers. Where is Beyonder and Soberk? Captain America asked. We don't know, replied T'Challa. Now help me revive Strange. A few of the Avengers took Doctor Strange from T'Challa. You abandoned Soberk? Asked Captain America. No, replied Ororo. He fooled all of us. You still have no evidence for those accusations, said Captain America. T'Challa was about to respond but his sister cut him off. Actually we do. I have a recording of my conversation with the Beyonder where he clearly states that Soberk freed him and sent him here for the Shangra Scrolls hoping that the artifacts would kill Beyonder, said Shuri. Aren't you supposed to be in prison, dear lady? Asked Captain America. Aren't you supposed to be less dense? We are the good guys. Soberk is the bad guy, said Shuri. Listen to her, said Ororo. As far as I remember the Avengers battled Beyonder and we won, said Captain America. Then we have two conflicting stories, said T'Challa. Well, if you don't believe me then speak with Moonstone because she fought the Beyonder here, said Shuri. At least listen to the tape, said T'Challa. And the rest of you can help search for survivors in the surrounding buildings, said Ororo. Soberk's attempt on Beyonder's life has altered the electromagnetic force in the city. Where is this tape? Asked Captain America. T'Challa nodded at Shuri and then she presented the Kimoyo to Captain America. Listen it to your heart's content, said Shuri. You should let the president hear it also, said T'Challa. Okay, said Captain America. Captain America then instructed the Avengers to head out into the areas around the mansion and into New York City. Ororo and I will return to the dimension that we last saw Soberk in, said T'Challa. I'll be coming with you, said Captain America. T'Challa's and Ororo's Kimoyos rang. Wakanda's Secret Service was calling and they informed their leaders of the attack on America's capital. T'Challa then told Captain America. Apparently Soberk's team is taking care of the attackers, said T'Challa. Then I'm going to the capital instead. I will check out your story after I know that the president has been secured, said Captain America. Ororo held T'Challa's shoulder. There is no need for the both of us to return to Soberk's dimension in light of this news. I have the sword so I'll go, said Ororo. Then I will take Cap to the capital, said T'Challa. I also need to speak with the president. The Black Panther ruled that Wakanda's spy network in America was deactivated, else he would have known the president's precise location. I'm going also, said Shuri. For what reason? Asked Captain America. To back the evidence that I just gave to you, replied Shuri. Do you think that he will listen? Asked Captain America. He doesn't have a choice, responded Shuri. T'Challa looked on as Ororo ordered the sword to send her back to Soberk's dimension. Then Storm vanished. T'Challa signaled to Captain America and Shuri. Come closer so that the teleportation pack can get you in its field, said T'Challa. Captain America and Shuri complied with the suggestion and the group was transported from New York to Washington, D.C. in a heartbeat. Chapter 3 Ororo found time to study the dimension. The place had no color. Ororo sensed a trace of the chaotic power that had taken Soberk. The nature of the force reminded her of when Soberk had sent Oya into a dimensional abyss. Then Ororo recalled the scene when Soberk was attacked by Beyonder. A multitude of spiritual entities had placed themselves between Soberk and Beyonder's channeled powers. The spirits had perished in order for Soberk to live. Ororo speculated that the spirits were Soberk's ancestors. Then T'Challa and I were correct to believe that he gained his powers from his deceased clan, said Ororo. He should have a reduction in power now. That works to our advantage. Still, did the ancestors know about the treachery that Soberk dealt in? Pondered Ororo. If they did know, then they got what they deserved, but if they were not a part of this scheme, then I feel sorry for their loss, said Ororo. Soberk appeared a short distance from her. Ororo had a flash of rage. She smelt the blood and heard the cries of the X-Men wounded in Soberk's attack. She consciously raised the sword to strike Soberk. He merely looked at her with disdain. "Killing me will only bring my soul to this place, and here I will be twice as strong," said Soberk. "At least you will be out of our misery," said Ororo. "Do you think so? You hurt my family and I will see that you are duly punished," said Ororo. "I have not the slightest clue what you are speaking about," said Soberk. "But know this, you are not the only one who has felt pain today." Ororo saw from his body language that he indeed was struck by a deep regret. "You're talking about your ancestors?" asked Ororo. "Definitely so," replied Soberk. "They were in on your scheme," said Ororo. Soberk's grey eyes glowed and he gritted his teeth to hold back his rage. "Let the beast loose," said Ororo coyly, and she placed the sword in a katana forward / position. "I suppose your mother was also in the group," Ororo sneaked in. Soberk took a step forward like a threatening dog. "I wonder what your mother thought about her son growing up to become just like his father." "I am nothing like my father," shouted Soberk. "Sure you are," said Ororo. "You are every bit of a mass murderer like he was. And today you inadvertently caused your mother to perish for a second time." Soberk's mind snapped. "I can kill you right here for saying that," said Soberk. "No you will not," said Ororo, "because the same rules that prevent me from cutting your heart out now also stops you from killing either T'Challa or me. I wondered why you didn't send us into the abyss like you did Oya. The trouble is that you don't know to whom we spoke with before coming here. If I disappear then the suspicion will fall on you." "I can always claim it was self-defense," said Soberk. "Then you would have to answer to the X-Men and an angry Wakanda," said Ororo. "Not even Balthazar would be enough to save you. Likewise you cannot kill me else the free world would rain down on you," said Soberk. Ororo noticed that Soberk didn't have a force field around him. "I cannot kill you but I certainly do this," said Ororo. A lightning bolt raced out her extended hand. The lightning crashed into Soberk and pitched him onto his back. He became semi-conscious. Ororo flew onto him and she carved out on his chest with the sword the Hausa word for liar. "So that you will see it for the remaining days of your life," said Ororo. "And trust me, this will not heal." The pain woke Soberk. "Get off of me," he said, and he used a spell to toss Ororo away from him. He clutched his chest and teleported. "Run," said Ororo. "Every time that you see the mark you will know exactly who you are." Raven's Safe House 02, looking into a mirror, Soberk studied the word etched into his chest. He cursed Storm and he tried a healing spell, but it didn't work. He cursed Storm again. "Concentrate on the plan," he said. Doctor Strange was not where he had left him, most likely Ororo and T'Challa had taken the man to the mansion. "I have to go back there," said Soberk. He went to the one piece of technologically sophisticated equipment in the house, a bug scanner. Raven had implored him to use the device if he ever returned from a one-on-one meeting with T'Challa or Ororo. Raven feared that the couple might bug Soberk and lead them to Raven's base. The couple's reputation for deceptive tactics had prompted the concern in Raven. Ororo was correct in a way. "I have to be overly guarded in their presence and that prohibits me," said Soberk. He activated the machine, it scanned his body and found nothing out of the ordinary. Soberk got a change of clothing and he prepared for his visit to the mansion. Chapter 4 Washington, D.C., the White House. T'Challa knew that President Ballinger was going to hit him with the current Banned from America policy and Shuri's breakout from the Raft prison. President Ballinger had exited the bunker when the two demons were defeated by Soberk's team. He was glad to meet Captain America, but not so much his companions. "Before we go any further," said T'Challa, "Shuri was taken out of the prison to deal with Beyonder. Technically I was not even supposed to be in the prison in the first place," said Shuri. Ballinger looked disappointedly at T'Challa. "This just compounds that you have no regard for America's protocols. You feel that you can do whatever you like over here," said Ballinger. "You are not even allowed to enter America. Try to understand," said T'Challa, "that Sobek has been lying to you. We have the evidence." "What evidence?" asked Ballinger. "Cap," said T'Challa. Captain America gave Ballinger the Kimoyo for him to hear Beyonder. Ballinger listened to the tape carefully. T'Challa scrutinized the president's face for an expression of surprise, but nothing came. Ballinger stood stiffly as he took in the information. When the recording was finished, Ballinger returned the Kimoyo to Captain America. "What are your thoughts on this?" asked Ballinger. "I don't know what to quite make of it as yet, sir," replied Captain America. "I have conflicting memories of what transpired. Similarly, Ms. Marvel was here with Sobek and she stated that there was a battle with Beyonder," said Ballinger. He turned to T'Challa. "That makes two people who refute the claims made on that tape." T'Challa thought briefly about Reed Richards' kids who were sheltering in Wakanda. They had fled the demon that attacked the Fantastic Four base. Those kids could have died, thought T'Challa. His patience with diplomatically dealing with Sobek was at its limits. T'Challa held nothing back as he spoke to Ballinger. "Continue as Sobek's stooge if you want to, but I will not allow him to operate freely again. If that means that your administration and my country will clash, then so be it," said T'Challa. "Then so be it then," said Ballinger, not backing down. T'Challa threw a puzzle for the president to dwell on. "Tell me what caused the demon attack," asked T'Challa. "Well, that's simple. Zim did," replied Ballinger. "Sobek told me that Doctor Strange had to summon the creature called Zim to battle Beyonder, and in the conflict some of Zim's demons got away." "You actually believe that pack of lies," said Shuri. "Well, it's better than a suspect taped conversation between a global threat and an escaped prisoner," said Ballinger. "I have a witness, Moonstone from the Thunderbolts," said Shuri. "That pathological liar Moonstone," said Ballinger. "I have read her file." "You really are blind," said Shuri. "Really? What would Sobek gain if your story was true?" said Ballinger with a rush of blood. "Captain America, take this woman back into custody." T'Challa's combat instincts intensified. "Sir," said Captain America. "I gave you a direct order, Captain," said Ballinger. Shuri touched Captain America's shoulder. "Don't worry, I surrender," said Shuri. "I don't want to give him the satisfaction to say that I resisted capture." "Well then, I have some real heroes to speak to for saving the capital," said Ballinger, and he eyed T'Challa. "I don't hope to see you when I return." Then Ballinger left with his Secret Service agents. "You know what, T'Challa? I want to see Sobek's dimension now," said Captain America. "I can't come along," said T'Challa. "I want to meet Sobek's team and learn what I can from them about the attack." He took off the teleportation backpack and gave it to his sister. "Take Captain America back to the mansion. Hopefully Ororo should have returned by now." "All right," said Shuri. "And if she has not, then check on Strange," T'Challa answered. T'Challa gave Shuri a crash course in controlling the teleportation backpack. They couldn't use it on the White House grounds. "You will have to do it in the avenue," said T'Challa. Shuri nudged Captain America. "So officially you are taking me back to the raft, but we are stopping by the mansion first," said Shuri. "So it seems," said Captain America. Shuri and Captain America left through the east exit while T'Challa used the south exit. T'Challa ran like the wind across the White House lawn. The membranes in his ears and nostrils were at peak level. His athletic body leapt off the green grass and onto the boundary wall. A moment later he was 2 streets away from the White House and the media crews that were there. He used his Tukumoyo to remotely call his sky bike from the Wakandan embassy. In 2 minutes, the vehicle flew down to his side. Anti-gravity plates on the underside kept the sleek bike from off the ground. The engine was quiet yet powerful. T'Challa got onto the vehicle and it exploded into the sky. The Black Panther headed for the area where Soberk's team had stopped the demons. T'Challa anticipated a tense meeting with the team. He wouldn't blame them because of what he did to Soberk. T'Challa monitored the team and he had a fairly good amount of information on the team's 15 members. They were a diverse group. There were 4 African-born Caucasians and an Asian. The rest of team came from the North, South, East, West and Central Africa. 6 members were females. The team's power set ranged from demigods to nanotech androids. T'Challa neared the site. He made out a fire station that was destroyed in the carnage. A few of the team members were taking out survivors. He would start here. But first he contacted the embassy and ensured that they aided the cleanup effort. Chapter 5 T'Challa felt the condescending atmosphere as he approached the group. A lanky woman approached him. Her code name was Nyabinji. She reminded T'Challa of a sect of warrior women in Wakanda. T'Challa was well aware that Nyabinji was a demigod. "What are you here for?" she asked in a thick intimidating accent. T'Challa looked around. "To see where I can assist," he replied. "We have this area covered so you can find another area to work in. As you can see the damage was extensive so you should have no problem," said Nyabinji, and she turned away from him. "Wait," said T'Challa. She turned back to him with a scowl. "Do you know how the demons got here?" asked T'Challa. "No," replied Nyabinji. T'Challa's hyper-hearing told him that she spoke the truth. "You know, I once liked you but what you did to Soberk was uncalled for, it reeked of dishonor," said Nyabinji. There was no point in arguing the matter, T'Challa told himself. He simply walked away. The team's plane flew overhead. T'Challa heard Nyabinji as she spoke to someone. He just asked where the demons came from. "He is leaving now," said Nyabinji. T'Challa was about to jog to his bike when Nyabinji called out to him. "I have someone who wants to speak with you," she said. T'Challa went back to her and he was given a cigar-length transmitter. "Hello," said T'Challa. "Hello, this is Emergwili. I'm in the plane that is flying above you." T'Challa looked at the futuristic plane that was now headed east. "What can I do for you?" asked T'Challa. The speaker's voice was aged and had a tinge of Magnus Gratos. "I want you stay away from my team. You are a distraction. There is a lot of negative emotion being directed at you and some members have anger management issues," said Emergwili. "Well, I was just leaving," said T'Challa. "The thing that puzzles me is that you went there in the first place. Surely you knew that it would drum up hostility," asked Emergwili. "I don't want hostility," said T'Challa. "Well, it exists and I would like you to refrain from approaching the team in the future," said Emergwili. Over and out. The communications device gave out static and T'Challa returned it to the owner. He quietly walked away, at least with the knowledge that Soberk had not corrupted the team, since the man who he spoke to didn't seem corruptible. At the back of T'Challa's mind he knew that the team could have been his brainchild. There was also the reality that should he do something drastic to Soberk then he would have to battle the team in the aftermath. It is a hellish and an unfortunate situation, thought T'Challa. Then a realization struck him. He turned quickly around and surveyed the team members. The scope of what they had achieved finally sunk into him. The team had quelled an attack which was usually done by the Avengers, the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. And the team had accomplished the task in a highly sensitive part of the world, Washington, D.C. T'Challa turned back to the bike. Sobek did this to promote the team, muttered T'Challa. It was a publicity stunt, only that the team does not know it. T'Challa's gut feeling told him that he was correct. He still needed evidence to make it all stick. He remembered that Ballinger spoke about Zim and the creation of the demons. But Zim doesn't use demons to do his work, thought T'Challa. He used his Kimoyo to access the demons' files in Wakanda's paranormal library. He read through the details and he was correct about Zim's modus operandi. T'Challa's gut instinct urged him on. It means that Sobek may have created the demons that attacked Washington, and he is indirectly blaming Doctor Strange since he can host them. But why did he leave Doctor Strange behind in his dimension unless he intended to use him? T'Challa heard in his mind Bollinger's words about meeting Sobek's team. He called the embassy to find out if the White House had set the time to meet the team. He was told that Ballinger planned to meet the team and the press in 1 hour. T'Challa headed skywards on the bike. "Think this thing through," he said. "The demons that attacked the city were stopped, but as far as Sobek has led everyone to believe, the Creator was still at large and could strike at any moment. Now if I were Sobek, where would I strike so that the team could deal with them? Ideally it would be the press conference. That would also mean that Sobek needs Doctor Strange's body." T'Challa quickly called Shuri. "Is Doctor Strange still at the mansion?" T'Challa asked. "Yes. A few of the Avengers are trying in vain to wake him," responded Shuri. "Ororo took Captain America to Sobek's dimension. Don't let Strange out of your sight. I have a hunch that Sobek wants him as a scapegoat for an attack on Ballinger," said T'Challa. "Tell Ororo as soon as she returns." "Sure," said Shuri. "I'm going to try and protect Ballinger," said T'Challa. "After all that he has done to us. Sometimes this heroic nobility really leaves a sour taste," said Shuri. "I know," said T'Challa. Chapter 6. "Well, what do you think?" asked Ororo. Captain America took another look around the endless and empty dimension. There was no visible ground, only the sense that a force kept you from falling into an abyss and that you could walk on it. "I don't remember anything else other than the battle with Beyonder, yet in my heart I know that something is wrong," said Captain America. "At least it is a start," said Ororo. "And where is Beyonder?" "We don't know," replied Ororo. "What exactly triggered your suspicion of Sobek?" "T'Challa and I went on a mission with him and learned that he had been deceiving us and the world. It must be pretty frustrating knowing that and being unable to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt." "You can't imagine," said Ororo. "I've seen enough. Let us head back. I want to find out what happened in the rest of New York and Washington," said Captain America. Doctor Strange's mansion. Sobek teleported into the foyer. He was met by an Avenger acting as a sentry. "Is Doctor Strange here?" asked Sobek. "Mockingbird and Hawkeye have him," said the Avenger and pointed to a room. "Thank you," said Sobek. Mentally he conjured 6 demons outside the mansion and instructed them to capture Doctor Strange. Sobek flew to the room. He truly didn't expected Beyonder to survive the trap, and the floating flipped over mansion amazed Sobek. "Another thing," said the Avenger. "We haven't found anyone in the surrounding buildings. It's like they disappeared." "How odd," said Sobek with forced concern. He opened the door and he found Mockingbird and Hawkeye. They were former S.H.I.E.L.D agents and lovers. Doctor Strange lay on the ceiling. "Get away from there," said a female voice. Sobek turned to his left and he saw Shuri standing on the wall. Apparently the soles of her combat boots were magnetic. The rest of her commando uniform was white and a weapon was slung over her left shoulder. Sobek had never interacted with Shuri, although he was responsible for her being imprisoned. "I beg you a pardon," said Sobek innocently. "You damn well heard what I said," said Shuri as she drew nearer to him. The front door was smashed open by two demons. They were 8 feet tall and burly. 4 arms came out of their torsos. 2 of the arms were larger than the other 2. The heads were slender and resembled hammer-headed sharks. The 4 other demons broke into the room and they attempted to seize Doctor Strange. Hawkeye and Mockingbird intervened. Shuri heard the noise and she hurried for the door. Sobek blocked her as he entered first. Sobek emitted a blinding light from his hands that stalled the Avengers in their fight. One of the demons snatched Doctor Strange and disappeared. Shuri pushed Sobek out of her path only to find out that she was too late. "I'm going outside to see if there are any more," shouted Sobek, and he vanished in a sphere of fire. He reappeared in another one of Raven's safe houses. The demon was waiting with Doctor Strange in his arms. "Time to go to Washington," said Sobek, and then he teleported the group. The Mansion, Ororo, and Captain America came upon the battle. The Avengers and Shuri were no match for the demons that became intangible. Ororo headed into the melee and she slew the demons with the sword. "One of them escaped with Doctor Strange," shouted Hawkeye. Sobek went outside to check if there were more. "Sobek came back," said Captain America. Shuri pulled Ororo to her side and told her about T'Challa's warning. "My goodness," said Ororo. "We have to check on Sobek," said Mockingbird. "I doubt that he is out there," muttered Ororo. Still she lifted the group on thermal winds and carried them through the broken front door. They found no one outside. "We have to get to Washington," said Ororo. Then she contacted T'Challa. Chapter 7 T'Challa focused on Sobek's scent. If anything, the scent should appear in the vicinity of the Congress building where Bollinger prepared to deliver his speech. T'Challa pretended as though he was in the wild. He bypassed 1,000 other scents and waited for the praise scent. He was pushing the extremity of his ability. The scent came to him like a sudden jolt. He narrowed down the odor to a financial building 2 blocks away from the Congress building. T'Challa fired up the sky bike and he left the rooftop that he had been perching on. He flew the bike straight into a window that was nearest to the scent. What T'Challa saw surprised him. The spirits of Amadeus Cho and Firestar revolved around a prone Doctor Strange. Sobek was apparently speaking with someone inside of Doctor Strange. T'Challa turned on the Kimoyo's recorder. "Stop right there," said the Black Panther. T'Challa gauged from Sobek's expression that the man was caught in 2 minds, fight or flight. Sobek eventually teleported away. T'Challa got to Doctor Strange and he clearly heard a voice. It was Zim's. "Hear me, foul creature," said T'Challa. "Who is this?" asked Zim. "T'Challa the Black Panther. Sobek has fled and left you to me. Stop your machinations. You are Ostur's chosen and she has the ear of the tribunal leader," said Zim. T'Challa was glad that his name carried such weight in the paranormal realms. He guessed that the tribunal leader was someone who Zim feared. Zim's voice disappeared. Amadeus Cho and Firestar were restored to their natural state and they fell onto the floor. Doctor Strange awakened with a gasp for breath. T'Challa checked the vitals on the Avengers. Afterwards he informed Ororo. The Congress building. Sobek was glum on the inside. He aborted the last act of the plan because of T'Challa's reputation that he couldn't risk to test. President Bollinger was speaking and Soberg stood next to him. And to Soberg's left was Emergwili, the second in command of the team called New Hope. The Mansion, Captain America was now convinced that all was not right with Soberg. He also understood that it would be futile to change Bollinger's mind. "You have my support now. What do you need?" asked Captain America. Ororo stared him deep in the eyes. "We need to take down Balthazar. To accomplish that we need to get in contact with Nova, and more precisely the Guardians of the Galaxy. They have a member who was a former Avenger, and she was the avatar for the Dragon of the Moon. That entity holds the key to Balthazar," said Ororo. "I can call Nova," said Captain America. "I already knew that you could, convincing you was the problem," said Ororo.